So now we get into episode 4, so shortly after Menelaus enters, the king of Sparta. He is celebrating because it's the day that he gets his hands on Helen. Now remember, this is the woman that he went to war for, all for her, and as we know, she is widely blamed for causing the Trojan War because of her perceived disloyalty to Menelaus, which prompted him to go to war with Troy in the first place. So Menelaus is happy about finally finding her because he intends to kill her, which I suppose we all kind of want to do with exes. So, as mentioned at the start of this discussion, Helen was married to Menelaus, so Paris came and took her allegedly against her will, but due to Aphrodite's promise to him, they eloped to Troy, thus pissing Menelaus off and making him go to war to get her back. So now he's arrived. So everyone, Menelaus included, blames Helen for eloping with Paris and betraying her original marriage oath, thus prompting all of the destruction that has been wrought in that 10-year period of war, of the Trojan War. But Helen goes back a little further in order to make her defense. Helen's defense is based entirely on several allocations of blame, none of which are attributed to herself. So, for example, firstly, Helen blames Hecuba because she gave birth to Paris. That's it. That's the whole reason. Secondly, she blames Priam, who failed to strangle his brat at birth because, apparently that's a thing. This leads her to blaming Paris because he made the call to judge Aphrodite, the most beautiful of all the goddesses, and thus have Helen remarried against her will and taken from Menelaus. Again, allegedly against her will. Then she blames Aphrodite because she was the one who actually sold Helen off against her will. She exclaims, "My exceptional beauty was a saleable asset for Greece." Lol, her exceptional beauty. At least she's modest. But hold on, she's not done yet. She also explains that while Paris was killed, she was still unable to return to Menelaus because she was then married off to Deiphobus, who was Paris's brother, and another of Hecuba and Priam's sons. She explains, "I had no choice. I was raped, not married. My life in Troy was the most abject slavery, nothing glorious about it. So therefore she should be forgiven. Free of blame, which if you took her story on its merits, fair enough." But really what this shows is that Helen is ready to blame Hecuba, she's ready to blame Priam, blame Paris, Aphrodite, and blame Deiphobus, even to an extent blame Menelaus. She's basically willing to blame anyone else except herself. So this is the story that Helen tells Menelaus when she is brought to him at this point in the story, but Hecuba is the one that responds. So here comes Hecuba's counter. You ready? Cool. Hecuba explains that the gods are not fools, and that they would never have perpetrated such acts of brainless stupidity. So she explains that the goddesses would not have made such offerings to Paris for a beauty pageant, for the sake of a game. She finds it ridiculous that the goddesses should be obsessed with a need to be thought beautiful, and by a mortal man, no less. She also says that Paris had the sort of good looks women run mad for, and that Helen actually fancied him, and that her elopement with him was good old-fashioned lust, and that her version of the story was simply a desperate attempt to blame the gods and exonerate herself in the process, make herself free of blame. Now, according to Hecuba, Helen lived a luxurious life, being married to Paris. She was basically drowning in an ever-flowing river of Phrygian gold, submerging the whole city under a tidal wave of riotous expense. Yet even so, Hecuba claims that many times she told Helen to leave, to escape, to go back to Menelaus if she really missed him. Because if she missed him so much, Paris wouldn't mind. He could easily find another wife. But Helen didn't do this. Hecuba also argues that if Helen was really heartbroken about being taken from Menelaus and there was no feasible way to return to him, then she would have tried to kill herself because her grief was so great. But again, this didn't happen. Helen didn't try to leave, she didn't try to kill herself because she was, according to Hecuba, right where she wanted to be. She was worshipped in Troy, treated like a princess. And if she was truly apologetic, then she would have come to them in as bad a state as possible to humble herself before them and seek their mercy. She says to Helen, if you had any decency in you at all, you would have come here on your knees, in rags, shaven head, and shivering with fear, prepared to humiliate yourself with every kind of self-abasement and shame for the wicked things you have done. But instead, she comes still talking about her exceptional beauty. Lel. So Hecuba says that in her pursuit of forgiveness, Helen should essentially have forsaken the beauty for which she was widely renowned and begged for forgiveness that way. And finally, Hecuba tells Menelaus to consummate the Greek victory by killing your wife. Now Menelaus agrees with this entirely, but rather than kill Helen on the spot, he says that he will return her to Greece, where she will be turned over to the families of the men who died in Troy, who will then kill her, likely in the most disturbing fashion possible, and that she will endure a terrible death that will be a warning to all women in the future to be chaste and moral in their behavior. Damn, son! Helen and Menelaus exit the scene at this point. Now the chorus then has a bit of a spiel, attempts to assign some blame to the gods, particularly Zeus, and even questions whether or not he cares. They say, "Do you care, on your radiant throne in the heavens? Do you even remember, King of gods, that we exist while the very air explodes around us and fire reduces our city to ashes and stone?" So pretty pessimistic about the gods at this point, which is, I suppose, always the case. It's just a lot more explicit at this particular point in the story. Then we get to episode 5. So Talthybius returns once again, this time with Astyanax's body, which is carried in his father Hector's battle shield. Now he explains to Hecuba that Andromache has been taken by Neoptolemus already, but that Astyanax's body will be given to her for proper burial. Remember, the burial customs were very important to these people, so much so that Cassandra contested earlier, if you remember, that burial rites were what separated the honorable from the dishonorable, and the Trojans from the Greeks. Now Talthybius even washed Astyanax's body already and wiped away the blood and the dirt from his wounds from, having been thrown off the top of a battlement. Nevertheless, Talthybius asks Hecuba to do this burial quickly so that they can all leave. Now this is one of those moments in the play that makes Talthybius' moral character debatable. Now over the course of the play, you may have noticed that he carries with him like a sense of duty. He gives the impression that he doesn't want to be doing what he's doing, but at the same time, he is also adamant that he's going to follow his orders, even if it means enabling the rape and the enslavement of all the Trojan women for whom he claims to feel sympathy. But I won't go into his moral character because that'll be something for you to decide yourself. The evidence can be handled in such a way that it can be argued either way. So I'll leave that to you. Anyway, as Hecuba buries the body of Astyanax, she does so with immense heartbreak, understandably. She curses the Greeks for not only having destroyed her home, her family, and her culture, but also this innocent little boy who never had a chance to experience the glory of his young manhood, never got to marry or fight for his country or bear children. She laments about how her love was wasted on him, or rather, how it amounted to nothing since he was killed so prematurely, how he suffered a meaningless death. Now Hector's shield is used as the boy's coffin, and the chorus helps her find some items to bury him with, including a robe that should have been worn at his wedding and a garland of flowers atop the shield. Now finally, Hecuba too curses the gods. She states that everything I have done in my life has meant nothing to the vindictive gods, and Troy, of all cities, they have persecuted with a particular hatred. Now again, the gods are not being portrayed fondly here. They're being portrayed as fickle, destructive, vengeful, etc., etc. However, despite this, there is something good that emerges, for Hecuba says that without such suffering, no one would ever have heard of us. No songs would have been written in memory of our suffering, nor would the poets 100 generations hence have taken us as their great theme. Now this is kind of meta because it fits in with the fact that 800 years later Euripides was writing about them. And even now, 2.5 millennia later, we are inevitably studying this in school, where the themes of war are still pretty relevant. Wonder if good old Euripides knew that was going to happen. Now Talthybius then orders his men to burn down the rest of Troy despite its already ravaged state. Hecuba says a sort of goodbye to Troy. She's even tempted to run into the flames and perish right then and there with her city. She says, "Why not run into the flames? What could be better for me, the queen of this burning city, than to die in its embrace and make its funeral pyre my own?" Now Talthybius, however, tells his men to hang on to all the women to avoid this, as they have been claimed as slaves and they are now property of the Greek lords. Now Hecuba and the chorus weep for their lost families, their lost city, and their lost culture. The chorus says, "Troy is burning, every house is in flames," until finally they announce Troy is finished and that everything is dying, even the name, which really captures how Troy and its people are not just destroyed physically, but they are destroyed culturally and spiritually as well. Now beyond this, the women of Troy and Hecuba are all shipped off to the relevant Greek lords who have claimed them. And finish, whatever, that's it. That's The Women of Troy by Euripides, translated by Don Taylor. Don Taylor also did a postscript, and there's a bit of an introduction, both of which are worth a read, but I won't go into those now since they're technically not a part of the original script by Euripides. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, ladies and lads. Hopefully you were able to make sense of the play's events if that's something that you were struggling with. Feel free to drop a comment below if you think I missed anything important, or even if you think I got something wrong. I don't think I did, but you never know. Also, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the flip, son.